In the darker shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read ancient tomes, the order of the Abercast. We are the brave and bold.
The Ages begins with the shocking story of Cain and Abel and the journey of violence and revenge spanning thousands of years, following Cain through his cursed life from an ancient invasion of malicious angels to the American Revolutionary War. A masterful, compelling journey through time, The Ages delves deep into arcane knowledge, myth, and legend. The art is stunning, and the story takes you on a journey where mortals, immortals, angels, and demons are all forced to deal with the folly that is God's creation. It's a beautifully dark and gritty ride through history. This 4-part story follows the astrological procession of the ages and how each 2,500-year age parallels major changes in the development of Earth's inhabitants. Cain's blasphemous struggle with the divine and sacred tyrant God will create and crumble empires, shape history, and cause a cosmic cataclysm.
Shonobelin then reveals the foul pagan orders of the blasphemous ceremony, stating, "In many of the initiations I observed or actually took part in, I saw a lot of variations of this kind of fraternity house humor. The only common thing in that many jokes and disturbing allusions were this business about riding the goat. That is interesting when one recalls Albert Pike's teaching about the he-goat of the witches' Sabbath, and the way witches in the Middle Ages demonstrated their allegiance to Satan, as they had to consent to sexual intercourse with the goat, or they had to perform the so-called osculum infanimum, which involved kissing the goat's backside to show their fealty to Satan. The Romanistic Knights Templar were known to have introduced such practices into their order after the Crusades had been completed. They were widely accused of practicing black magic, blasphemy, and homosexuality during their many initiations. Such wickedness was too much even for Rome, who began to persecute the Templars. When interrogated, the Templars told of strange occultic rituals wherein they worshipped the goat-headed demonic apparition called the Baphomet. This manifestation of the Baphomet seems to have been regarded with idolatrous reverence amongst the Knights Templar. Some authorities on the subject associated the Baphomet with Arabic Abu Hamafet, pronounced in Moorish Spanish as Buhamafat. This name meaning the father of understanding or father of wisdom. The word father in Arabic is taken to imply source. The source in this case is clearly the devil. Secret Society's obsession with the goat is most striking when one looks at what the Lord says in Scripture, quote, "When the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then he shall sit upon the throne of his glory, and before him he shall be gathered the nations, and he shall separate them one from the other, as a shepherdeth divideth his sheepeth from his goats. And he shall set his sheep to his right hand, and put his goats to the left. And shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come, ye blessed of my father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. Matthew 25:31 through 34. Let's get it started! Goat riders in, goat riders in the sky. Their horns were still on fire and their hooves were made of steel. Goat riders in, Masonic goat riders in the sky.
The Abercast. Occult. History. Conspiracy. Violence.
All right, y'all. This is John Towers. Thank you for joining me on the Abercast, the Masonic Ghost Riders. So this is a kickoff to this is just a kickoff for Freemasonry February here in 2018. I'm going to do a series of theme shows this month for a bunch of different reasons. Maybe I'll get into why if I have time. However, this is going to be a dense packed episode, and I'm shooting to get it all done tonight. Home slices. So let's get going. We're going to blast off. Because here we got a lot to get through, But I want to mention here at this episode, weirdly is going to rub up against a lot of our past episodes. It's in a way, I kind of look at like all these other episodes of the show and be like, oh, I was gearing up to do this whole Freemasonry thing. And you might be thinking, why? I look through here, I don't see it, I don't understand it. I'm going to try to get through this material pretty fast and just using the understanding that you've listened to some of these other episodes. So when I blow past something like the Order of Dionysian Artificers or Hiram Abiff, I'm just going to take for granted that you've checked out episodes 60 and 61 about the Secret Destiny of America by Manly P. Hall. Other episodes you might want to take a refresher on before you get started in Freemasonry February is episode 3, Robert W. Sullivan IV, Cinema Symbolism. Episode 20, Those Who Weep for Tammuz. Episode 31, The Magnum Opus of Alchemy. 36, Robert W. Sullivan IV, Cinema Symbolism 2. Episode 50, The Stone of Destiny. I'm not sure about that one. That one is more for the next episode, I think, than this one. Episode 60 and 61, and like I said, in the cold open, you could probably tell because of the title of this, we're really winding up to lean heavily on that episode 69, which is Baphomet, the Sabbatic Goat of Mendes. You may also want to revisit the Solomon episodes. For this month, we will be talking a lot about Solomon and his temple. And maybe those Enoch episodes, because we are going to be dipping our toes back into the antediluvian characters and their genealogy a bit. So you might be asking yourself, why am I listening to this guy babble passionately about Freemasonry? Is he a Mason? No, I'm not a Mason. I'm a full disclosure type of guy, and I'm just going to tell you I'm not a Mason. I'm not a Mason. I never was a Mason. But ever since the 90s, I've been interested in the mysteries of Freemasonry. You know, it was first the Masonic connection to UFOs and the Roswell and the intelligence community, and then it sort of morphed into their connections to the Knights Templar. and the Knights of the Crusades, which we kind of already talked about in the cold opening. And then it sort of landed on the romanticism and patriotism of their link to the founding fathers and the founding of this country and their promotion and support of the French Revolution. It was then when I was learning about the enemies of in the different campaigns of the opposition to Freemasonry that eventually it eventually sparked me out of the woo-woo sort of interest in it. I was reading things about almost open sort of kind of like gang war in the 30s between Freemasons and Nazis in Berlin. And that was a precursor to the straight-up persecution under the Nazi regime in World War II and the Holocaust. The fascist Nazis treated Masons as a sort of opposition, I guess. And when they would get thrown into concentration camps, they wore red triangles. The open reason for this was Nazis thought that the Masons were on like this high level tool of a Zionist conspiracy or a systematic crypto-Jewish organization at its highest levels. And I guess you can look at it knowing what we know now about the Nazis is that at their highest level they were obsessed with the occult. And we could see this anti-Masonic movement of the Nazis as just, them taking out their sort of occult competition. So farther back in the 20s, Masonry was persecuted by communists in the Soviet Union and China. And even in America, every few decades, starting from around the 1820s, was this anti-Masonic political movement. It surges every now and again. Not driven by anti-Semitism or occult one-upsmanship here in the States. I think more in the States it's because of America's distrust of secrecy. That's what I would suspect anyways. Anyhow, it just doesn't stop in the Western world. In the 80s, in Iraq, the Ba'athist Party made it a felony to promote any Zionist principles, and they included Freemasonry within that. So I sort of started looking at it like, well, if you could judge an organization by their enemies, I was sort of hooked on the whole damn thing. But I was not nearly as sophisticated in these manners as I am now, and I was still really wrapped up and bent out of shape on the weirdness and the imagery and the other weird shit these guys did when you hear about these rituals and their initiations and so forth. And I'd seen the toe cable and the blindfold stuff in movies and in books and stuff around that point, and I was okay with that. I was cool with it. But there was this rumor or myth or something of Masons riding goats during initiations that was really wild to me. So sometimes you would see a picture of a goat, sometimes them actually riding a goat, or sometimes you would see a picture of them like on a mechanical goat. So I thought that this would be a great way. It would be a great way to weed out. It'd be a great way to kind of start this thing as kind of like where I started, with my whole Freemason fascination and how I ended up there after, 80 something episodes of this podcast, and on top of like the reading and also the writing and stuff that I've done. I thought that this would be a great way to just kind of throw water in your face and get you ready and revved up for Freemasonry February. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to start with the Freemasonic Goat Riders. It sounds like a fucking Clutch song. Whoa. It's a conspiracy. They're out to get me already. All right. Sorry about that. So I have a word of warning as we wade into this topic and just decoding and analyzing anything that has to do with Freemasonry, especially how deep we're going to kind of go, is sometimes a slow burn because there's a lot of threads, as we were about to see, and it's going to take me a while to kind of weave them all back together. So, as you were about to see that, or right off the bat here, we're gonna get going. get going right after this. All right, so when Masons start their meetings or whatever, and I have to say, going into this is probably going to sound one direction or the other at any given time, but this is not pro-Mason or this is not anti-Mason at all. This is just from my research, and I'm talking about my fascination and love with the mystery of what is Freemasonry. So, if I laugh at something that's inappropriate, if you're a Mason and I laugh at something that's inappropriate, just forgive me. Wait until the end of the episode to get wound up. Also, if you're a Mason and you're like, we don't fucking ride goats, what's this fucking guy talking about? Just hear me out for the episode, okay? Hopefully it's going to be less than an hour. I don't want to piss anybody off. But if you're also one of those guys where they're like, oh, he's a shill because he doesn't think Masons ride goats and rule the universe, then also just chill out and just listen to the episode, okay? So I should have maybe opened with that because I'm already starting to launch into this. So when they start their Masonic meetings and stuff, so there's like 3 of their main levels or whatever at this point. There's the Entered Apprentice, which we're going to get into next week. We're going to talk all about the Entered Apprentice ritual or ceremony or whatever. That's actually what this episode started as until I started getting wrapped up on this whole riding the goat thing. Anyhow. So at any given time or whatever, there's like every level or every degree of Masonry can only be in the lodge when they're doing the correlating business of that degree. So everyone can be in there, including entered apprentices, when other entered apprentices are being initiated. But then, so they'll get brought in, I guess, after they do all their other business or what. I'm not exactly sure how it works, right? But what I do know is that when they're weeding out the entered apprentices and stuff, and only, okay, hold on, let me see if this works. So they have a password, and the one guy who's kind of I think he's like a senior warden or something. So when they're trying to get all the junior members out, you have to understand it's because any Mason could go to any lodge whenever they have a meeting. So it's possible that they're sitting there and they're going through and they're like, I'm not sure if this guy's on the level. So, or what? So they're like, okay, well, everyone who's not of this degree has got to leave now. And it's not that formal or it's not that casual. There's a formality for everything that takes place in these things. So in order to make sure that only the degrees that's supposed to be in there is in there, they have a code word. And you're like, what the fuck does this have anything to do with riding goats? Just calm down and just listen. A lot of research went into this. So they're moving through these different orders of business, and only certain degrees have access to the proceedings. So when they want to make sure everyone's out, they have this password. And this password is Tubal Cain. Okay, so you're like, man, that really sounds familiar. Where do I know Tubal Cain from? And it's not that fucking Russell Crowe movie. That is not I don't think, an accurate portrayal of the character of Tubal Cain. But we met Tubal Cain in our Enoch episode, specifically the last one, where we were talking, the source material was Ginsberg's Legend of the Jews. It was one of the last things we talked about. We were talking about the punishment of the angels, I think. So, but it just offhandedly mentioned this Tubal Cain. So that's the code word, is Tubal Cain. So here's how it goes down. The worshipful master gives one rap with his gavel. I should have got a fucking hammer out so I could do this. I don't have anything within arm's reach that will work. I have a sword. Okay. So he goes, brother, senior warden, you are sure that all present are master masons? And the senior warden says, I'm not sure that all presents are Master Masons, but will ascertain it through my proper officers and report. Senior Warden says deacons will approach the west. Deacons, both junior, senior, repair to the warden station in the west. First, the senior deacon whispers the password of a Master Mason into the ear of the junior deacon, Tubal Cain. And the senior deacon whispers the name to the senior warden's ear, which one deacon passes up the one side of the lodge and the other side. And they go up, stop at each brother present for the password. And each brother raises up and whispers in the ear of the deacon, Tubal Cain. And they are... If there are any present that cannot give it, the deacons pass by them, especially if they are lower degree members, which would be the entered apprentice or fellow craft. And after the deacons have gone through the entire lodge, they meet before the worshipful master in the east. The senior deacon gets the pass again from the junior deacons and passes it up to the master. And they return to the senior warden. Remember how I just told you that there's like formality in everything these guys do? There's formality in this for sure. In the west, and pass up the same way, and they take their seats again. The wardens will rise and say, all present are not Master Masons worshipful. The worshipful master will say, all below the degree of Master Mason will please retire while we raise the lodge. And the junior deacon... And the junior deacon says to those below the Master Mason, brothers, please retire. And he sees that they do so. And after they are all out of the door, it is closed by the junior deacon. The senior warden says, all present are Master Masons worshipful, and make the sign of the Master Mason. So when I say make the sign of the Master Mason, that's kind of like a artifact from when this part of the episode was going to be about the initiation of the first degree. So if you're worried about this Master Mason sign, just tune in next week. I'm going to get through all these signs and all these different poses and stuff that these guys do to let everybody... They're flashing gang signs back, basically. They're like Freemasonic gang signs. They're like, yo, I'm the highest degree, yo, and they're like, no, I'm the lowest degree, so I'll get into that. I should have took that make the sign because I didn't want to add any confusion. Here I am confusing. The worshipful master then says, if you are satisfied that all present are Master Masons, you will have them come to order as such, reserving yourself for the last. That's my Master Mason voice, by the way, whenever I'm reading these ceremonies. That's the way I'm gonna read it. That's how you could tell he's like the badass compared to the rest of them. So that's an acting decision that I chose to make while I was doing these. Okay, so back to the whole point of this is this Tubal Cain situation. And like I said, we met Tubal Cain in the Enoch episodes a few weeks ago. And he was sort of this figure. He's the instructor of every artificer in brass and iron, and the forger of all instruments of bronze. And he is seen as being sort of the birth father of science. And we're going to get to know him a lot better when we get to the Master Mason episode. In an episode or two, we're probably 3 now at this point. Or maybe 4, who knows? I don't fucking know what I'm doing. But I want to take a second out to talk about Tubal Cain's half-brother, Jabal, who was the father of ranchers, a pioneer of all livestock and agricultural technology. And when I'm saying these words, you should be hearing in the back of your mind, goats. Right now, goats. And that his trade is with his beasts. Again, everybody, goats. His name also means Shibboleth, which means a strong stream in Hebrew. And Shibboleth is also a Freemasonic code word in the fellow craft or the second degree. But I don't want you to think about the second degree yet. That's 2 episodes away or whatever. So just keep that Shebalowith in your brain, because it is going to circle back around when we're wrapping up this whole Goat Rider thing. So important if you're trying to follow along, like in your Bible. I'm not talking about Jubal. I'm talking about Jabal. Jubal was the 3rd brother, who actually I think might be the 1st brother. He was the one. Okay, so there were 3 brothers and a sister. Jabal and Jubal were Ada's kids, and Tubal-Cain, and I think her name was Nereif or something, belonged to a woman named Zillah, and that all 4 of their kids their dad was Lamech. So Hebrew, Jewish, Hebrew, whatever, all their bloodlines, especially back in the old Bible, the old Torah days or whatever, went through their mother's lineage. I think this has something to do with them being on a lunar calendar as well. So when they make the distinction, they're like, yeah, they're all the sons of Lamech, but these 2 were Adas and these 2 were Zillahs. It's because that's important with the lineage. This is why Mary is... This is why this is going to sound a lunatic to Christians. This is why it was important that Jesus had a mother. Okay, the reason that Jesus had a human mother is because Mary's line was in the line of David, making Jesus the king, literally the king of the Jews. Now, when I was growing up in the Southern Baptist land, I was told, all my preachers and Bible school teachers and everything told me that when the Romans called Jesus the King of the Jews, they were making fun of him. But literally, when they called him the King of the Jews, that's because, when you trace his lineage through Mary, you wind up in the house of David. This is also why a lot of people think like he wasn't a poor carpenter for sure. He had a super noble family going for him. Anyhow, swerving off into Jesus land. I'm not a New Testament guy. I'm way more comfortable in the Old Testament, but however, I do know that. Where the fuck was I? Okay, Jubal was the other brother, and he actually was the dude that invented music. Which is interesting, but not at all relevant, at least right now. So, just between these 2 characters, the sons of Lamech, Tubal-Cain and Jabal, we start seeing a dichotomy. It's like a duality or like a yin and yang, but not between like good and bad. We get to see this duality of agriculture and metallurgy. And this duality and other dualities are important for Masons. And it is encoded in a lot of places in Masonry. From the black and white tiled floors to the square and compass symbols. The square is to represent the physical world, and the compass represents the invisible spiritual world. The square represents masculinity. The circle, or the compass, draws a circle, which represents femininity. The joining and conjoining of these 2 ideas around the creator god G is right there. It's the Masonic logo we see all the time. But they are literally everywhere. Pillars holding spaces between floors and ceiling, ropes, and they do a lot of ropes. They do, and a lot of their tracing boards have these weird ropes and stuff around them. We're going to get into in a couple episodes when we actually get talking about Tubal-Cain. There's a little Tubal-Cain logo that has a lot to do with a rope. It's also all about fucking. It's really weird. We're going to get into it. When I say it's a lot about fucking, that's a vulgar way to say it. It's about the union of between men and women, this masculinity and this femininity. Ropes and cables, is that where I was? The 2 symbolic ideas together, the concept of Jacob's ladder, which is used, steps, which is used a lot in Masonic tracing boards and stuff. the concept of Jacob's ladder, which is like kind of an axis mundi where the vulgar and the divine meet. Just trust me, it's everywhere. It's fucking everywhere. So let us move forward, and we're going to develop these ideas and get through throughout the whole month. But right now, let's, well, not quite right now, but in a little bit, let's get into some goats and some herd animals and shit like that. So what to make of this story or legend or urban myth or whatever you want to call it, that Freemasons have a ritual about riding goats or a goat? And it seems sort of prevalent. If you do a Google image search, you will find a lot of anti-Mason political style cartoons depicting well-dressed, blindfolded men riding goats or the cartoons and stuff, they're all like, Freemason? Does your wife know? And it's just like all this weird, like double entendric stuff about these dudes riding goats. Or you'll find rudimentary mechanical or tricycle like goat toys with funny captions and stuff. And at first you got to be like, no way, get out of here. These grown men aren't gonna wheel each other around on this toy goat. But I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not sure. These sort of political cartoons seem really compelling to me. And as you look more and more at it, it does get weird. People have started posting old catalog entries for mechanical or toy goats with names like the Low Down Buck, the Fuzzy Wonder, the Ferris Wheel Goat Coaster, the Ferris Wheel Coaster Goat, and the Bucking Goat. Some of the goats did like fake farts, and some of them had water hose attachments. I mean, what the fuck is that? The illustrations were not specifically of Masons, but of prisoners pushing the goats and blindfolded cowboys riding the goats. So I don't know what that was all about. But the catalog does reference candidates, initiations, and so forth. So what's a guy to think about this whole goat riding thing? And is it really that big of a deal? It is weird for sure, but it is that big of a deal? I don't know. So using my 2020 vision on the small type in the Google images, I started sifting through the testimonials, and I see people writing about the great time their members had with the goats, signed, yada yada, from the Paul Revere Legion 28 and the Phi Epsilon Frat of Emmaus, Pennsylvania. So, there is no goat riding references in Duncan's guide and monitor of Masonic ritual, which is what I'm using for a lot of these episodes. Also, Robert Macoy's Dictionary of Freemasonry, which is I'm also using. Actually, there's not even an entry for goat in the Masonic dictionary. So I scoured through it, though, and I did find this thing. Harpocrates, among the Greek writers, he was compared with Apollo. So there we go. That's a pretty strong Masonic idea. The sun, this is why they're always situated east to west. That's how they move around the room and stuff. They're following the path of the sun, is identified with Horus. This is also another strong Masonic kind of thing. The Egyptian god of the sun, the youngest son of Osiris and Isis. Both were represented as youths, and with the same attributes and symbols. He was believed to have been born with his finger in his mouth, as indicative of secrecy and mystery. That's not what I get out of that symbol. The Greeks and the Romans worshipped him as a god of quiet life, repose, and secrecy. He is described as by Plutarch as lame in the lower limbs when born to indicate the weaker and tenderer shootings of corn. He also symbolizes the sun when in its early or feeble condition. He is sometimes represented in sculpture as a child wearing the skull cap or crown of the upper and lower world. And holding his hands in the whip and crook to expel evil influences. He is also represented here. I could have just jumped down to this. This is also important. He is also represented mounted on a ram, which carries a ball on its head. It's his left hand is armed with a club, and he presses the 2 forefingers of his right hand upon his lips in the symbol of silence. And intimates that the mysteries of religion and philosophy ought to never be revealed. And the profane or uninitiated, being armed with the club identifies him as Hercules of the Egyptians. So, there's a lot of interesting things here for this little goat rider. He's talking about being quiet, which is definitely a part of Masonic initiation rituals. Like, the idea is, hey, if you can't keep your fucking mouth shut about the password or about your secret handshake, then how are we going to trust you to keep your mouth shut about important things? I guess that's the whole point. So I thought that this Harpocrates kid was really interesting. He's a goat rider. He's telling people to be quiet. I mean, that's cool, but I can't find anything really to back that up in any kind of initiation. That's not saying there's not one going forth. Like I said, I was looking solely at the entered apprenticeship one. So I started thinking of like every college movie, and I started to get this idea that riding the goat was like a prank for fraternities. That's where these bicycles or these toy goats or whatever were coming in from, right? Weird hazing rituals in the midst of anti-free Masonic push here in the U.S. that got projected on the Masons. That's a theory I could buy. Sure, no problem. But then I started thinking of stuff I already know about Masonry, and I know a few Masons, and the visual of any of them riding this toy goat is hilarious to me. But I started also thinking about stuff that I know, and I started thinking back to our Baphomet episode and our alchemy episode, and I really started to think of the goat as a symbol. And I felt like I wanted to find one of these fraternity or other sort of off-brand brotherhood rituals, to see if there was more than just an upperclassman making pledges think they gotta fuck a goat sort of ritual going on here. So I found a ritual from a Protestant secret society. It was in England, Ireland, and Scotland, called the Orange Order, which I think is an initiation for something they called the Royal Arch Purple Candidate. It's an initiation for the Royal Arch Purple Candidate. And these are the following excerpts. And what might or might not come across here as I'm reading this, depends on how bad I cut it up, is a lot of this is just them making fun of Catholics. So I think I cut this part out, but they have a part talking about how they make fun of how the Pope holds his hands, like how, like on the Hierophant card or like in artwork where the Pope is like pointing up with his first 2 fingers and down with his second 2 fingers. So that hand gesture is tied into this ritual because they're actually making fun of him. Remember, these are Protestant Irishmen, Protestant Scottishmen, and Protestant Englishmen. Before the blindfolded Royal Arch Purple Candidate experiences riding the goat, he is led over to within 4 or 5 feet in front of the proposed built ladder, symbolizing Jacob's ladder. So we're going to get into Jacob's ladder next episode, because the Entered Apprentice tracing card is all about Jacob's ladder. The candidate, which is why I included this, the candidate steps 2.5 paces until forward towards the ladder in observance, called the advancement. The Royal Arch Purple draft explains the advancement by steps is not unique to the Arch Purple, but is shared by the Masonic order, and the 2.5 paces represents the secret mystical number of the order. This mystical number permeates through all aspects of Arch Purple secrecy. I'm going to skip down a little bit. So I just added that part so you could see they're already referencing the Masons, right? So, and they keep doing it. So, like the secret society, like all secret societies and occult bodies, the Royal Arch Purple entrusts its initiates with secret passwords, handshakes, knocks, and signs as keys to open doors into the secret world of mystery. The Royal Arch Purple Order itself owns 3 permanent passwords. The entrance password for the Arch Purple is Shibboleth, which, if you remember at the beginning of the episode, is Tubal Cain's brother's name. And also, this is a link to the second degree of Freemasonry, because Shibboleth is also a password to that. So here, this orange order is using for their purple arch Shibboleth. Remember, this is the guy who basically everything we know about herding and probably some agriculture, domesticating animals, all started with Jabala, whose name is also Shibboleth, who is a password into this order where these guys are going to ride these fucking goats. The central password for the Arch Purple is the Ark of God. The ignorant candidate is later informed that this mystical password really represents G-O-A-T when spelt backwards. So the Ark of God is actually backwards goat. The great and grand password for the Arch Purple is the Great Jehovah be our guide. So this candidate has to do a lot of stuff. There's a ritual and a lecture centered around Jacob's Ladder, which we'll see in the next episode is featured in the tracing boards associated with the initiation of the entered apprentice in Masonry. The candidate also has to do a ritual featuring a coffin, which is associated with the tracing board of the Master Mason. And this is all just walking him through the steps of being young to old, eventually having to face your own mortality. This is all common for these secret societies. And then when you're lifted up, you're born again, whatever, into the lodge or secret clubhouse or whatever. But now I'm skipping ahead to the goat part, okay? The ceremony of riding the goat is shared by other institutions involved in the mysteries. Former 32nd degree Mason and Wiccan high priest William Shonobelin testifies in his own experience with Freemasonry. I was kept in an anteroom, and the fellow who was in charge of keeping an eye on me said that I should not worry about riding the goat in the initiation. Most guys did it and never fell off. Another fellow came in and said that I shouldn't believe any of those stories about riding the goat. And a third fellow winked at me and said only lost a couple of candidates in the last year through death by violence, so I shouldn't worry. It was all done in the manner of good-natured teasing. Shonobelin then reveals the foul pagan origins of the blasphemous ceremony, stating, "In the many initiations I observed or actually took part in, I saw a lot of variations of this kind of fraternity house humor. The only common thing in the many jokes and disturbing allusions was this business about riding the goat. That is interesting when one recalls Albert Pike's teaching about the he-goat of the witches' Sabbath. In the way the witches in the Middle Ages talk about riding goats. I had a Freudian slip there. Demonstrated their allegiance to Satan. They had to consent to sexual intercourse with the goat. or they had to perform the so-called osculum infamum. Yeah, osculum infamum, which involved kissing the goat's backside to show their fealty to Satan. The Romanistic Knights Templar were known to have introduced such practices to their order in the after the Crusades had been completed. They were wildly accused of practicing black magic, blasphemy, and homosexuality during their many initiations. Such wickedness was too much, even for Rome, who began to persecute the Templars. When interrogated, the Templars told of strange occultic rituals wherein they worship a goat-headed demonic apparition called the Baphomet. Secret Society's obsession with the goat is most striking when one looks at what the Lord says in Scripture. Okay, we're going to skip past the rest of that. Was the cold open. I feel like I'm whipping a dead goat. So, thinking about the imagery and correlations, not only from these anti-Mason political cartoons, but these weird old catalog pages, but with the arch purple initiation, I continue to wonder about the Masonic goat connection. Some Masons themselves trace their lineage back to the ancient Templars, who themselves were accused of worshiping Baphomet, who later, through the eyes of Aleister Crowley and Eliphas Levi, became the goat-headed deity that embodied the concept of uniting the opposites, which we know is the magnum opus of alchemy, uniting the microcosm with the macrocosm, uniting the male and the female principles, uniting the heavens and the earth. And I couldn't help thinking about all the symbolism in Masonry, you know, the compass and the square and the tow ropes and the cables and the Jacob's ladder, and all the stuff that I mentioned at the beginning about this uniting of opposites, which is the, you know, I can't remember what Crowley called it. He said that it's the purpose of all magic is the uniting of opposites. So I, was thinking about this goat symbol, just in the midst of all this, after the smoke kind of cleared, and I was wondering about it, and guess what? I found a paper. Some guy named Eugene Pawlowick, MM, tackled the subject back in 1991 in a paper he calls Liber Capricornus, the Symbolism of the Goat. I'm kind of jumping into the middle of this thing. Yet, can we dismiss our ancient friend who has played such a great role in the myths and legends of all religions and cultures of Western Europe? The goat dates back to the very earliest primordial memories of man, and perhaps even used as a joke within the lodge. It would do us well to look at him as a totem or symbol of the great work. In fact, if you will bear with me, I think I shall be able to prove to you that using the training we are recommended as fellow craft masons, we can find that the humble goat too reflects the truth of masonry, veiled in allegory and illustrated symbols. The goat is known through all of us through the ancient science of astrology, first developed by the Chaldeans, or as they're commonly known, the Babylonians. The goat symbolizes male fertility and is known to even those who pursue the daily astrology columns in the local newspapers as representing the astrological sign of Capricorn, December 22nd through January 22nd. Hey, we're in the sign of Capricorn right now. Huh. How you like that? A little bit of synchronicity here on the Abercast. Capricorn is a combination of both goat and fish, according to J.E. Surlott in the Dictionary of Symbols. This dual aspect refers to the dual tendencies of life towards the abyss, or water, or chaos at the beginning of time, the heights or mountains, or order, and Malkuth, the earth. I don't know if I agree with that. Malkuth. The earth, as symbolized by the goat aspect. The fact that the very same Babylonians who gave us the symbol of Capricorn and the astrology, or the science of astrology, were the first temple builders, and the goat for them symbolized the essence of the temple or the lodge, an animal usually found climbing in the mountains, thus from its great ziggurats to the Temple of Solomon, even to later churches, the goat was seen as a symbol of man striving to reach God through the buildings, and temples represented mountains. Since in all religions God's abode is symbolized by mountains, what a better symbol to attribute to our own striving understanding of the GAOTU than a goat. And here we too find an anagram for goat. According to a research monograph on the Dionysian artificers and early Masons, edited by Manly P. Hall, the symbolism of the goat relates to pre-Christian god Pan and Dionysus. The goat god was accepted by the later Greek mystery schools as the symbol of temple builders. In fact, the Dionysian artificers was such a mystery school. They viewed practical temple construction as a source of understanding the mystery of nature and God, thus being one of the early esoteric schools from which Masonry was inherited. Certain symbols and teachings, most specifically this Greek mystery school, developed the Ionic column, which we are introduced to us in the fellow craft degree. Once again, this column, which acted as a cornerstone of Greek architecture, literally holds up the temple as the very support of the mountain or home of God. The Ionic column is later developed over the Doric. Having developed in the 7th century BC, it allowed for more filigree work in its base and on its top, and it's seen as being more feminine than masculine. Doric column. The Dionysian artificers or the architects were associated of scientific men who were incorporated by the command of the king Pergamus. Command of the kings of Pergamus into a corporate body, and they had the city of Tees given to them. The members of the association were intimately connected with the Dionysian mysteries and were distinguished from the uninitiated inhabitants of Teos by their science and their words and their signs by which they could recognize their brethren of the order. Like Freemasons, they were divided into lodges, which characterized by different names, such as the nature of the Association of Architects who erected those splendid edifices in Ionia and whose ruins even afford us instructions while they excite our surprise. If it be possible to prove the identity of these two societies from the coincidence of their external forms, we are authorized to conclude that the fraternity of Ionian architects and the fraternity of Freemasons are exactly the same, says Dr. R. Schweinburn-Clymer in his book, The Ancient Mystic Oriental Masonry. Besides representing the temple or home of the gods, the goat represents the active male sexual or fertile aspects of nature. As Capricorn, he rules the returning sun from the darkness of winter solstice. In the sign of the goat, Capricorn, the sun begins to resume its ascent towards the spring equinox. As well as the goat horn is a hollow phallic symbol, representing even today as the cup of plenty or the cornucopia, which we see represented in the lodge. Says J.E. Surlott, in mythology, the goat Alamothea, who fed the infant Jupiter milk, given that the general symbolism of the horn is strength and that the goat has maternal implications, and is in addition that the shape of the horn, phallic on the outside and hollow on the inside, endows it with complex symbolism, including that of a lineagram or symbol of generation. It is easy to understand its allegorical use as the horn of abundance. Plob points out also that the cornucopia is an expression of posterity, deriving from its association with the zodiacal sign of Capricorn. The androgynous symbolism of the horn of plenty is typical of the symbolism of the goat in general. While the Greek goat Pan the Greek goat gods Pan and Dionysus were male, we look at the goat as an animal in masculine terms. While it's both female and male, the identification of the male goat by his beard, since both genders have horns, the phrase "by my beard" or "he pulled my beard," as well as the style of beard being called a goatee, all relate to this goat. The goat gods Pan and Dionysus in Greek mythology represented the forest and the unbridled nature, lust in the case of Pan, and drinking and fertility in the case of my boy Dionysus. Hence, from the OED, we have the term for the lecherous older man, "You old goat." Pan Pan is represented as being half human, half goat with horns, and would later be used in medieval times to represent the devil. Ironically, the horns on the head of Michelangelo's statue of Moses are also goat horns, symbolizing not the devil, but the power of nature and the nature's god, fiat lux. Or, in the Bible, it states that Moses was beheld by his people as having two rays of light springing forth from his head. Hark, my beloved, here he comes, bounding over the mountains, leaping over the hills. My beloved is like a gazelle or young wild goat. My beloved is mine, and I am his. He delights in the lilies while the day is cool and shadows are dispersing. Turn, my beloved, and show yourself as a gazelle or young wild goat on the hills where the cinnamon grow. How beautiful you are, my dearest, and beautiful your eyes behind your veil, like doves, your hair like a flock of goats streaming down Mount Gilead, the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. Here in... I don't agree with that at all. Your hair is like a flock of goats streaming down Mount Gilead. This term Gilead, this name Gilead, also has a lot of complications and implications with this story. Okay, so they're saying that's the Song of Song, or a portion of the Song of Songs, which belongs to Solomon. Herein, as well as the Old Testament, we find the beautiful love poem, which views the goat as symbolizing nature and fertility, as it did in pre-Christian times. In the Song of Songs, both lovers refer to each other as goats. As to be expected, since the lovers in this poem are shepherds and a shepherdess herding goats. And we have the symbolism of goats in relationship to sacred mountains or temples. If they both refer to each other as goats and they hook up, aren't they both riding the goat? It is enough to mention that this song is known as Solomon's, who plays such an important role in Freemasonry. In medieval times, clerical knights and military orders made up of priests during the Crusades differentiated themselves from regular knights by riding upon goats rather than horses. This tradition can be seen in the Knights Templar, who would ride horses, but two knights on one horse, thus representing their clerical origins. That whole paragraph is this guy grasping at straws. The two knights riding this one horse, has nothing to do with the goats. Need I relate to the most obvious use of the goat known to all Master Masons? The scapegoat, an animal who leads the others to slaughter, now commonly used as a reward to the unwitting victim of some malice. It is obvious that the initiate stands in for Hiram Abiff and takes his blows accordingly. In referring to the goat, perhaps we are unconsciously warning the entered apprentice of his ultimate end in the sojourn through the degrees. As mentioned earlier, the boat and the goat god Pan became equated with the devil in medieval. I think that's a typo. As mentioned earlier, the goat and the goat god Pan became equated with the devil in medieval Christianity. But to medieval occultists, especially Rosicrucians, the goat symbolized elemental energies of the earth, the signs of Saturn, and the alchemical element derived therefrom. In the tarot, it is the major arcana card 15, the devil, who shows a goat-headed deity with a man and woman chained to him, the symbolism that of people who strive for material rather than spiritual gain. The goat of Mendes, or Baphomet, who the Templars were accused of worshipping as a goat-headed deity being formed of both male and female principles. You should go back and listen to my episode about the Baphomet. With the caduceus of Mercury for its phallus, one arm pointing up and down, with the Latin solve et coagula written on them. This is not the Christian devil, but a symbol of the ancient alchemist, representing the fact that God is a combination and balance of male and female forces, light and darkness, moisture and dryness, and the very principle of Hermes Trismegistus, as above, so below, is what's symbolized by Baphomet. And another goat-headed deity worshipped by the ancient pagan Celt people were of Cernunnos, the horned god of the wood. Today, in witchcraft, covens of the goat head seem to symbolize this ancient deity. Unfortunately, to those who remain in the dark, the goat deities are seen as something evil rather than as a symbol of earth, fertility, the prima mater, and the first principle. Freemasonry in its past, like its predecessors, the Knights Templar, have been accused of being in league with the devil, being satanic tool, etc., and has arisen from the fact that Freemasons, by their initiation into the light, have been eager to research and study mystical symbols of the past and present without fear or irrational prejudice. In time past, the religious persecution and superstition of the mystical Mason has treaded the path of heresy in search for the light of truth.
Vienna, 1683. Today is September 11th, 1683. The mighty army of the Ottoman Empire, led by the savage and radical terror troops of the Dar al-Harb, surround the walled city of Vienna and begin a siege to break the golden apple of Europe and kill, enslave, or convert all of its inhabitants. The valiant citizens stand against the tyrannical army with the steadfast leadership of Count Ernst Rudiger von Stromberg, the help of the ever-living rebel Cyrus the Dead Guy, and the hopes of the faraway King Jan Sobieski III and his army of flying hussars. The Vienna 1683 comic is available right now from Stigmata Studios at stigmatastudios.com and on indieplanet.us. The Non-Standard Squad, 1944. World War II. 3 weird American soldiers are on a search and rescue mission into the oldest and darkest regions of Europe. A cursed, ever-living warrior, Cyrus the Dead Guy. An experimental warbot, Sergeant Lane McCord. An all-red axe, mysterious rogue with a demon-possessed arm, come face to face with an army of magically corrupted, machine-obsessed elves, a magic hammer-wielding Norse Ubermensch, and a Nazi wizard who is a member of the ancient Dark Order of the Shining Hexagon. The Non-Standard Squad 1944 comic is available right now from Stigmata Studios at stigmatastudios.com and on indieplanet.us.
We did it just a little over an hour. So, what'd you guys think of the Masonic ghost riders? Do you think that there's Masons out there that ride goats? I think we pretty much handled this myth. I mean, I don't know what you guys think. Are you looking for Freemasonic February? And the other tricks I have up my sleeve. What are your thoughts about the Masons? Were they involved in the Roswell cover-up? Are they offshoots of the ancient order of the Knights Templar? Would you be interested in becoming a Mason? Would you ride the goat? The next episode, we get into the real first degree, the entered apprentice initiation ritual. Please go to stigmatastudios.com. Pick up some comic books, yo. If you've enjoyed the show, if you learned something from the show, if it's piqued your interest and you're doing more research on it, if I just helped you pass an hour and a few minutes of your week, I would like you to consider supporting the show. The best way to do it is to rate and review, please. I'm trying to get some more rate and reviews. That helps get more exposure on the show. You drop me a line on social media, tell a friend about the show. Any little bit helps, and there's plenty that you guys can do to help. That doesn't cost any money. So please, I'm trying not to be like a fucking broken record about this. I mean, I need some fucking help. So that's it. I'm John Towers. This has been the first episode of Free Masonic February, the Abercast episode. I had to double check. 86, episode 86. The Masonic Goat Riders. Stay tuned for next week's episode. The initiation into the first degree, the entered apprentice. Now I'm leaving you here tonight. We're gonna go ride some goats. Or ride goat riders in. Goat riders in the sky.